Alcatraz provided maximum security with minimum privileges. There was one member of the prison staff for every 2 prisoners, the highest ratio anywhere in American jails. From 1934 until it was closed down last year, 1,600 of America's worst criminals made this trip across the windswept bay with its swirling tides. It was the most feared journey in the criminal world.
U.S. Marshals have just released age progression images of convicts who escaped Alcatraz more than 60 years ago. A case that has grabbed the attention of Americans for decades has also remained a big mystery for investigators. Over the years, speculation has mounted on whether these men are still alive.
Welcome to Alcatraz.
If you were to search for the most infamous and dreaded prison in history, one name always ranks number 1.
Alcatraz.
And Alcatraz.
Alcatraz.
To Alcatraz.
But the most infamous prison in U.S. history.
No one's ever busted out. No one's ever made it.
Since I've been warden, a few people have tried to escape. Most of them have been recaptured. Those that haven't have been killed.
The Rock was a maximum security penitentiary, a federal prison on Alcatraz Island, about 1.25 miles up the coast of San Francisco, California. Alcatraz was originally a military fort, a prison used by the United States Army. It was later acquired by the U.S. Department of Justice and became a civilian prison in the August of 1934, after the buildings were modernized and security was vastly increased. Alcatraz officially claimed that throughout its 29 years of operation, nobody had successfully escaped. There were a total of 36 prisoners who made 14 attempts. 2 men tried twice, 23 were caught, 6 were shot and killed during their escape attempt, 2 drowned, and 5 are listed as missing and presumed dead. Alcatraz was America's ultimate fortress for the most dangerous and irredeemable criminals, known to have held the likes of Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, Robert Shroud, aka the Birdman of Alcatraz. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a psychological asylum.
Alcatraz had the reputation of being the most secure prison in the country.
Even if you do get out of Alcatraz, you still have to contend with 6 watchtowers as well as a 20-foot fence with barbed wire. And if by some miracle you make it over that as well, you still are dealing with the dark and turbulent waters of the San Francisco Bay.
No one has ever escaped from Alcatraz. And no one ever will.
It is winter of 1960. A 32-year-old man was checked into Alcatraz with inmate number AZ1441. His name? Frank Morris. A criminal prodigy born in Washington, D.C., Morris was abandoned as an infant and was raised in foster homes. By age 13, he was already in and out of juvenile detention for theft. After Morris got out of juvenile prison, he basically turned to a life of crime. He would go on to commit minor burglary and theft, but his luck would run out in 1945 when he got caught robbing a bank in Louisiana and was sentenced to 10 years in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. But he escaped in 1956. Although he was recaptured a year later while committing another burglary, this would be the first notable escape and would give way to what was possible. Over the years, Morris bounced between prisons, including a prison in Atlanta, but was ultimately sent to Alcatraz on January 20th, 1960. Experts believe his lack of family bonds made him ruthlessly self-reliant, a key trait for surviving prisons. John and Clarence Anglin, born into a family of 13 siblings, they were farm boys from Florida. They began robbing banks and other ventures as a team in the early 1950s, and they were finally caught in 1958 after robbing a bank in Alabama. They were sentenced to 15 to 20 years, but after repeated escape attempts, the brothers were transferred to Alcatraz with inmate number AZ-1476 and AZ-1485. Interestingly, the Anglins and Morris had already known one another after serving time in Atlanta, and as luck may have it, they were assigned to adjacent cells in the B block of Alcatraz in December of 1961. Because the Anglins and Morris were already familiar, had a shared history of prison escapes, and trusted one another, they began engineering what we know today as one of the greatest prison escapes in history.
I'm in. Me too. Go.
See that water? It's over a mile of swim to land. The currents make it seem like 10. The water's so cold, it would numb your arms in a matter of minutes.
The average cell on Alcatraz had an area of 9 by 5 by 7 feet. Every cell had a bed, a blanket, a desk, a toilet, a sink, and a little air vent measuring 6 by 9 inches. This vent led to a 3 feet wide utility corridor, which was the starting point of this escape. For them to even have a shot at escape, they would need the following: an air pump, metal spoons, saw blades, a drill, raincoats, plastics, fire or a sufficient heat source, and paddling woods. They would also need towels, tissue paper, glue, soap, and human hair, and we would see why. The metal spoons were used to chisel away on the air vent to gain access to the utility corridor at the back of their cell. The raincoats would be used to create inflatable rafts, and the plastics, when melted by the heat source, were used to seal the raincoats to create a floatable raft. The toilet paper, toothpaste, soap, and concrete dust, well, believe it or not, were used to create paper mache heads that will be placed on their bed the night of the escape. The dummy heads were given a realistic appearance using paint and real human hair, which were collected from the barbershop floor at Alcatraz, while the towels were placed on the bed to mimic the human body when laying down. In Alcatraz, prisoners were allowed and were given access to musical instruments which they were allowed to play in their cells during the hour of music. This privilege alone was a huge mistake and would play a big role in what made the escapes possible. You see, Frank Morris played the accordion, and night after night as his cohorts chiseled away, he would play the instrument to mask the sound of the motor drill. When these vents got wide enough, they created fake vent coverages using cardboard and paint to conceal their progress and avert suspicion. Each night they would sneak out of their cells into the utility corridor, and they would climb to a vacant area at the top of the cell block where they set up a workshop. Here was where they hid their supplies like the drill, the raincoats, wood, and other equipment. This workshop was exactly where they fabricated all the items used for the escape, like the dummy heads, the raft, the fake vent, and other items. To inflate the raft, they stole the bellows from the accordion Morris played. Over several weeks, Morris mapped out Alcatraz and identified a blind spot, but there was a problem. In the way was a great big ventilation fan and a protective grill. So over several weeks, they used electrical wire to wrap around and pop out the grill rivets, and ultimately gained access to the fan motor, which they dismantled and removed. Now with the pathway clear, the raft and paddles ready, they could almost taste freedom. On the night of June 11, 1962, with all preparations in place, the men began the escape. They set up their beds as usual, dummy heads under the pillow, towels under the blankets, and the painted cardboards concealing the vent. Once in the service corridor, Morris and the Anglin brothers climbed the ventilation shaft, went through the fan which they dismantled, and were up on the roof. Hauling their gear with them, they descended 50 feet to the ground by sliding down a kitchen vent pipe. They climbed two 12-foot barbed wire fences, and having spent several nights at the rooftop, Morris had mapped out a blind spot in the network of searchlights by the power plant next to the northern shoreline. Once they got there, they inflated the raft with the bellows from Morris's accordion, and sometime after 10 p.m., they launched it and departed for Angel Island, 2 miles to the north, instead of the San Francisco Bay, which was much shorter in distance. "7 a.m. roll call, they don't respond. So a guard goes to check on all 3 of them. He sees all 3 lying in their beds, so he walks over to Frank's cell and attempts to wake him. And Frank's head falls off.
I said get up, Morris. Open up 109. God damn it, Morris. I said get up. Jesus Christ.
This guard had the shock of his life. He probably thought he had just decapitated the man.
Immediately, the search for Morris, John, and Clarence began. They searched around the prison and by the bay, but couldn't find the man. But they found a man with possession of a 4th dummy head. Alan West, born in New York City and was imprisoned for car theft in 1955. First, he was in Atlanta, the same Atlanta Morris and the Anglins were once in prison. It was in Atlanta that he, just like the Anglins and Morris, had known one another. After a failed escape from the Florida facility, he was transferred to Alcatraz in 1957 with inmate number AZ1335. He actually planned and facilitated the escape along with Morris and the Anglins, but he couldn't pass through his vent because he had rebuilt it a little bit the day before. So eventually, Morris and the Anglins left him behind. He would go on to cooperate with law enforcement and give them a detailed description of the escape plan, which is really the only reason we know as much as we do.